Once upon a time, in a charming countryside, there lived a mischievous little rabbit named Peter. He was a plump, fluffy bunny with soft grey fur and bright, curious eyes. Peter lived with his mother, Mrs. Rabbit, and his 3 sisters, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, in a cosy burrow beneath a large fir tree. Now, Mrs. Rabbit was a wise and caring mother who always looked out for her children. She would often warn them about the dangers of Mr. McGregor's garden. Mr. McGregor was a grumpy old farmer who took great pride in his garden and grew the most splendid vegetables in the entire valley. One sunny morning, Mrs. Rabbit called her 4 little bunnies to her side and said,
"My dearest children, while I'm away, I want you to stay away from Mr. McGregor's garden. It's not a place for little rabbits. His garden is filled with traps and dangers. I'll be back soon and we'll enjoy some delicious chamomile tea together."
Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail nodded obediently, promising to stay out of trouble. But Peter, being the most curious and adventurous of the bunch, couldn't help but wonder what was so special about Mr. McGregor's garden. He decided that he wanted to see for himself. Mrs. Rabbit cautioned him sternly.
"Peter, you must stay close to home and not venture into that garden. Remember what happened to your father, who met a terrible fate at the hands of Mr. McGregor. Please be a good little rabbit."
Peter replied,
"I promise, Mother."
but in his heart he had every intention of sneaking into Mr. McGregor's garden. As soon as Mrs. Rabbit hopped away, Peter's curiosity got the best of him. He knew his mother had gone to the bakery, which gave him the perfect opportunity to explore the forbidden garden. He slipped out of the burrow and made his way to the garden, his small cottontail bobbing with excitement. The garden was a sight to behold, filled with rows of beautiful, plump vegetables. Peter couldn't resist the temptation. He squeezed under the gate and hopped into the garden, his eyes sparkling with delight. He nibbled on a lettuce leaf, then sampled a juicy carrot. It was a rabbit's paradise. Unbeknownst to Peter, Mr. McGregor had been keeping a close eye on his garden. He spotted the naughty little rabbit helping himself to the vegetables and let out a fierce growl. Mr. McGregor, a tall, gaunt man with a grizzled beard, was a farmer who had no patience for intruders in his prized garden.
"Get out of my garden, you pesky rabbit!"
he shouted, brandishing his hoe. Peter, alarmed by the angry farmer, dashed for cover. He scurried under a large watering can, where he hid in trembling silence. Mr. McGregor searched the garden but couldn't find Peter. Finally, after a while, he gave up, muttering,
"I'll catch you yet, you little rascal."
Peter stayed hidden beneath the watering can for what felt like hours, fearing Mr. McGregor's wrath. When he felt safe enough, he cautiously emerged from his hiding place. He couldn't wait to return home and tell his sisters about his adventure in the garden. However, Peter's escapade had a consequence. His once pristine blue jacket was now covered in dirt and mud. He had lost his shoes in the garden while fleeing from Mr. McGregor. Mrs. Rabbit would not be pleased, and Peter knew he had been a disobedient and naughty bunny. As Peter approached home, he encountered a friendly robin perched on the fence. The robin had witnessed the entire incident and sympathized with the young rabbit. He hopped closer to Peter and offered some advice.
"Stay out of Mr. McGregor's garden, young rabbit. It's a dangerous place, and you're lucky to have escaped. Now hurry home before your mother returns."
Peter nodded, his head hanging low in shame. He thanked the robin and hurried back to the burrow, trying to put on a brave face despite the scolding he knew awaited him. When Peter arrived home, he found his mother, Mrs. Rabbit, already back from the bakery. She was sitting in her cozy chair, a pot of fresh chamomile tea brewing on the table. Peter's sisters, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, were lined up neatly in their clean dresses, waiting for their mother's return. Mrs. Rabbit greeted Peter with a warm smile and asked about their day. The other bunnies shared their activities while Peter remained silent. Mrs. Rabbit noticed the state of Peter's jacket and missing shoes. She sighed and gently asked,
Peter, did you go into Mr. McGregor's garden?
Peter nodded, his eyes filled with remorse. He recounted the whole adventure, how he had sneaked into the garden, tasted the delicious vegetables, and narrowly escaped from Mr. McGregor. Mrs. Rabbit scolded Peter, telling him about the dangers of Mr. McGregor and how disobedience could lead to grave consequences. She was relieved that Peter had returned unharmed, but she couldn't help feeling disappointed. The other little bunnies chimed in with their own concerns, pleading with Peter never to be so naughty again. They knew that their mother worried about them, and Peter's recklessness only added to her stress. Mrs. Rabbit gave Peter a stern but loving lecture, reminding him of the importance of obedience and the dangers of venturing into places he shouldn't. She hugged Peter and assured him that she forgave him, but she also insisted that he promise never to go near Mr. McGregor's garden again. Peter, realizing his mistake, nodded earnestly. He promised his mother that he would be a good little rabbit from then on and obey her rules without question. Mrs. Rabbit, pleased with his sincerity, offered a slice of chamomile bread and honey as a reward for his honesty and repentance. The story of Peter's escapade in Mr. McGregor's garden quickly spread through the rabbit community. It served as a valuable lesson for all the young rabbits, emphasizing the importance of listening to their mother's advice and staying away from danger. The days went by, and Peter Rabbit became a wiser and more obedient bunny. He learned to appreciate the safety and warmth of his burrow, the delicious chamomile tea his mother made, and the loving guidance of his family. While he would still have his share of adventures, he would always remember the day he got into trouble in Mr. McGregor's garden and the valuable lessons he had learned. And so, Peter Rabbit grew into a fine and sensible young rabbit, filled with wisdom and gratitude for the love and protection of his mother, and the lessons he had learned from his misadventures. The other young rabbits in the countryside admired Peter, and his mother was proud of the good, obedient little bunny he had become. The end.